Kia ora everyone, welcome. My name's Tracy Tierney. I'm Director of the Greater Christchurch Partnership and really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on this webinar. As you can see, the details on screen. So we've got your camera and mic turned off and we have the Q&A button available for asking questions. So we're going to try and address some of those at the end. For any that we don't get to though, please be assured we will be answering them and responding on that email address. We'll also be looking at putting the questions and answers, the recording, so just be aware this is being recorded, of this webinar and a copy of the slides on the presentation. So some of the slides do have a little bit of detail on them, but again, if it's difficult to see on your device, please don't worry, you will be able to see them online later. So with that, we will get underway. So just next slide, Karen, thanks. So today is obviously to talk about the Greater Christchurch Draft Spatial Plan. So today we've got talking with us myself, Mark Stevenson from the Christchurch City Council. So just next slide, Karen. Tim Harris from Selwyn District Council. So the real purpose of today is to give you a bit of a background into how the draft spatial plan has come about, the key elements of the plan and what we see as being the next steps. And obviously to answer any questions, but also to really encourage submissions. So we'll give some details at the end about how to go about that. Next slide. So the Greater Christchurch Partnership, I'm sure many will be aware, it's been in place since 2007 and has been a partnership between local government and central government agencies working together. Latterly, we've had the Kāinga Ora, sorry, my room's going dark, the Kāinga Ora, the Whakawhanake Kāinga Committee is our urban growth partnership for Greater Christchurch, and it has recently joined us, and one of its first tasks was to get the urban growth strategy underway. So sorry if I appear in the dark, this is obviously going to be a bit of a challenge for me, but if I wave my arms, you know that's what I'm doing. So just next slide. Urban Growth Partnership. So there are 6 of them in the country. So we are the one of the last regions to get the Urban Growth Partnership. And again, its focus has been to get the spatial plan underway. And also ours was aligned with looking at mass rapid transit business case. So that's been our purpose and what's kept us really busy since the partnership was formed in May last year. So next slide. So I think it's just good to give a little bit of planning context. This hasn't popped out of nowhere. We're not starting from scratch. It's been strategic direction since 2007 to consolidate growth. But as you can see from the chart on the left, what was intended to what's actually being delivered, there's been a gap. And there's been a lot of reasons for that. We've had obviously earthquakes and other events happen that meant that the form of our urban areas has changed. So in 2023, it was a chance to refresh and update that. And those 4 key elements there in terms of how do we accommodate more people and businesses, got to make sure we're protecting our productive land and environment, make sure it's really well thought out, affordable and accessible housing, and of course, as we're all really aware of at the moment, adapting to climate change and natural hazards. So again, it's been, I think the key message here is that it is continuing strategic direction that our community has told us it's wanted for quite a long time. This is then looking us forward into the future. So next slide. So the process, so again, it's listening to and learning from what work has gone before us. So there's quite a few pieces that feed into this plan. So the housing capacity assessment, opportunities and challenges that we've looked at before we developed that urban form and direction. So we also earlier this year, which you may have participated in, did some public engagement so that we could actually inform the drafting of the plan and also help inform the business case which Waka Kotahi process are going through. So we're now at where we're at today is that we're in that formal consultation process, which then will lead to hearings and adoption of the spatial plan. We hope towards the end of this year or very early next year. So next slide. So Hui Hui Mai was that pre-engagement that we did earlier this year, and we had a really, really significant response. Over 7,000 people interacted in the online survey, and a few hundred more that were interacted via workshops and seminars and one-on-one visits and a range of mechanisms. But I guess the key messages we got out of that informed the draft plan were that 86% agreed with that focusing growth around the key urban and town centres and along public transport routes, so quite a strong finding. Very strong focus, so 68% on making sure healthy waterways are really top priority. 56% supporting higher density, making sure that it's well-planned design. So that was a really key message. Yes, we can support it, but it's got to be done really well and provide for a range of whānau and families in the way that they choose to live and maintain quality of life. And 53% agreed with the proposed MRT route. Of those that disagreed, it was quite a key focus was wanting to extend it and make sure it's reaching all of our districts. So there are some of the high-level findings that we had. Certainly climate change came through really strongly, and we've, again, tried to incorporate and look to reflect what we've heard in the draft spatial plan. Next slide. The other very clear expectation we've got for the plan is from mana whenua, and that's ensuring that we're recognising te tiriti in this plan and committed to helping mana whenua achieve their priorities and expectations. So as listed there, some of those expectations are, but it's around protection of waitapu and waihautanga sites, restoration of the environment, lots of things that many of us want, but are particularly important for mana whenua, and also development of kāinga nohoanga on Māori land. So that is a key feature that you'll see shaping the spatial plan. So next slide. I think at this point I'm handing over to Mark, who will start talking about the actual spatial plan strategy.
Thank you, Tracy. This slide here has an image that shows the proposal for how and where we grow as a subregion in accommodating 1 million people. By focusing growth in the urban centres connected by effective and accessible public transport, we can accommodate population increases and achieve the outcomes that we're seeking of quality of life, economic prosperity, and affordable housing. The same pattern of growth shown here is shown in respective opportunity 5 that we'll come on to talk about. And it recognises that growth will occur and be focused in these areas, but there'll be other locations. This pattern will be supported by key moves and directions of the spatial plan to deliver on. If we go to the next slide. This slide you won't be able to read on the screen, but it summarises the opportunities, the directions, and the key moves. And we'll now just talk through each of those, beginning with opportunity 1, which I'll hand over to Tim to talk to.
Afternoon, Ko Tim Harris, Takinua. So I'm going to talk about the 6 opportunities, as Mark mentioned. I'm going to talk about the first 3. And just to remind you, these opportunities around, well, they've been identified in the spatial plan, and that will help us close the gap between where we are now and where we want to go in the future. So they're a critical part of the plan. And just going back to that, if you really want to grasp the actual engine room for the spatial plan, it's on pages 30 and 31 of the spatial plan. Have a look at that. That basically summarises, I guess, the methodology and the framework for all of the spatial plan. So let's get into these opportunities. The first opportunity I want to talk to you about, my various screens around me, is an opportunity that protects and restores and enhances historic heritage in the sites and areas of significance to Māori and provide for people's physical and spiritual connection to these places. So as Tracy said, our commitment to mana whenua is a key component, one of the key directions of this spatial plan. So this is a key opportunity. And so if you see on the slide, it's around avoiding urban development over waihi tapu sites and protect, restore, enhance waihi taonga and ngā wai. So I guess as part of the broader landscape for Greater Christchurch, there's significant historic and cultural associations, and there's huge importance for various areas for Ngāi Tahu whanui across the sub-region. It reflects the occupation of the area for more than 1,200 years. So the spatial plan recognises and places importance on the protection of these sites and areas of significance for Māori now and into the future. And you'll see on that slide, it's not particularly easy to see the key, but this identifies some of those key areas across the Greater Christchurch area. So if we just turn to the next slide. So this is opportunity 2, and it's around reducing and managing risks so that people and communities are resilient to the impact of natural hazards and climate change. And look, this is a really important, we can see it up in the North Island, around the world. Climate change is upon us now, and in the future it's only going to get worse. So this is a key opportunity. And on the map in front of you, it identifies, if I can just find it, here we are. It identifies, I guess, some of those key areas in terms of reducing and managing risks so that people and communities are resilient to the impact of natural hazards and climate change. Again, that key is a wee bit hard to see, but really it's around focusing, incentivising growth in areas free from natural hazards. So you build where the natural hazards aren't, and then you strengthen the resilience of communities and ecosystems to climate change and natural hazards. So look, right across Greater Christchurch, there are areas subject to significant risks from natural hazards and the effects of climate change. The spatial plan ensures that future development is directed away from these areas, and investment in infrastructure reduces exposure and resilience of communities in these areas as increased by taking action. And look, this is pretty obvious, but there's some key areas to avoid: those that are vulnerable to flooding, those areas that are vulnerable to climate change, in particular coastal erosion, coastal and tsunami inundation. And then we've got areas, and those maps show some of these areas, but areas on the Port Hills in particular that are subject to rockfall and cliff collapse and other mass movements. That diagram to the right of the slide, this points out some strategic infrastructure. So it's a wee bit different from the natural hazard areas, but there's still key areas that we try to avoid. In particular, I guess the airport, and that shows the airport noise contours in the yellow in the centre of that frame. If we could just perhaps move to the next slide. Opportunity 3. This is around protect, restore, enhance the natural environment with particular focus on te ao Māori, the enhancement of biodiversity, the connectivity between natural areas and accessibility for people. So through Hui Hui Mai, this came out pretty strong in terms of what people want to see for Greater Christchurch is an appreciation of the access to the natural environment. It's one of the key, I think, advantages we hold across the nation in terms of access to spectacular landscapes, the mountains and the like. So this is a very key component. So really it's around avoiding development areas that have got that natural value, prioritising the health and well-being of water bodies, looking after and expanding our network of green spaces, protecting highly productive land for food production, and obviously we've got the national policy statement on highly productive land out currently. And then we're also exploring a really interesting concept in terms of protecting our, I guess, some of these values through the development of a green belt around urban areas. And that map earlier on in the piece showed you that green dotted line around the outside of the urban area, and that was the green belt. What that's going to look like, that'll be part of, I guess, the blue-green strategy that's been developed, and Tracy will speak about some of the key development outcomes from the spatial plan. So look, just in terms of some of the notes here, a healthy natural environment is obviously fundamental and intrinsically linked to the well-being of people and places. The spatial plan recognises the importance of the natural environment as the foundation for the future of Greater Christchurch, particularly in the context of climate change and the need to strengthen climate resilience. So look, we're really trying to commit to working with nature, not taking it over. We're looking into the future. And look, I think I'll pass over to Mark now for the next 3 opportunities. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tim. Opportunity 4, as stated on the slide, is to enable diverse and affordable housing in locations that support thriving neighbourhoods that provide for people's day-to-day needs. Greater Christchurch's population is growing and changing, and that will impact on how and where we live. The spatial plan is focused on providing greater housing choice. It's about meeting diverse needs of the community, and that need includes affordable housing, as well as enabling more people to live in places that are accessible to employment, education, social and cultural facilities, and other opportunities across the cities and urban area. To inform the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, there has been an assessment of the capacity for the Greater Christchurch sub-region to accommodate demand over 30 years and beyond. From that assessment, there is sufficient capacity across the Greater Christchurch area to meet long-term demand that is over 30 years. Notwithstanding that being the case at a Greater Christchurch level, and particularly in the city context, there does, however, remain a shortfall in Selwyn districts over the long term of approximately 3,000 dwellings. The response isn't necessarily to zone more land. The response will be through exploring the feasibility of intensification, particularly around centres and public transport routes, and increasing minimum densities in greenfield areas. The image on the bottom right of the slide indicates the capacity that exists, and the black dashed line represents the bottom lines of demand. Within this opportunity statement, there is commitments being made, most notably 4.1 on the slide there, of enabling the development of Kainga Nohoanga on Māori Reserve land, and that's about working as partners to invest and provide infrastructure to support development and ensuring that the future urban form for Christchurch doesn't preclude or prevent the growth and development of that land. We want to enable and support implementation of the Kainga Nohoanga strategy and ensure that that's facilitated. Next slide, please. This slide here just reinforces that we're focused on increasing the density of housing around centres and public transport corridors. Greater intensification around centres and along those routes will provide a range of dwelling types to meet the changing demand, and that has a number of benefits. That includes more people living close to services and employment, a competitive public transport system that is facilitates mode shift and puts less reliance on private vehicle use. In doing so, then it can have a subsequent effect of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and as a consequence of that, it can also provide affordable and diverse housing choices. Providing for the projected higher demand for smaller and more affordable units is recognised and reflected in the focus on intensification and moving towards a different topology of medium and higher density than we've seen necessarily in the past. That includes townhouses, terraced housing and apartments in order to provide a variety, but also more affordable options. This slide seeks to represent the range of locations across the top where intensification is being sought and the densities that would be anticipated in those locations. And towards the bottom of the slide are the different types of housing that we'd see in those different areas. Notwithstanding what's on the slide in terms of a focus on intensification, greenfield development will still be part of the future and provides an alternative choice. That's currently provided for through the identification of future urban development areas and the capacity that's been enabled by private plan changes. To contribute towards the overall outcome of a well-functioning urban environment, greenfield development does need to be different from, and in being different, it needs to be well connected with employment, services, and leisure facilities through public transport. It needs to be integrated with existing urban areas. It must meet a need identified by a capacity assessment and be at the right scale, density, and location to minimise impacts on productive land and the associated use of that productive land. If we go on to the next slide, I'll introduce opportunity 5. So this is, unlike the last slide, which was about housing, this slide's about business. And Greater Christchurch has a strong and diverse economy, and leveraging the assets and strengths of the sub-region is fundamental to achieving the outcomes we want, including supporting business growth and increasing quality employment opportunities. The spatial plan provides for the needs of business through a network of centres that are well connected and serviced by public transport, and we're well placed to meet projected demand for commercial and industrial land over the next 10 years in that regard. The direction is to very much consolidate and strengthen those centres rather than seeing the commercial activity dispersed over locations. We also have more than sufficient capacity for industrial land over the next 30 years and beyond. Whilst the current supply of commercial land in the context of the sub-region is not likely to meet demand over the next 30 years, those shortfalls are expected to be met through the intensification enabled to implement government direction on intensification, and that will be in our central city as well as the larger urban centres. Within proximity of the central city, there'll be some industrial land that's rezoned to mixed use, principally residential, to provide opportunities for population in those areas, which in turn supports the city and those centres nearby. The alignment with infrastructure is fundamental to meeting needs, and we need strong partnerships and joint planning to act in a coordinated way. That includes partnering with mana whenua to identify and respond to specific infrastructure needs for Māori reserve land, and establishing strong partnerships with providers, including but not limited to energy and digital technologies, and ensuring that planning for that technology is well integrated into new development and is future-proofed for a more resilient picture in the long term. We go on to the next opportunity statement, opportunity 6. This last opportunity is about prioritising sustainable transport choices, and sees the spatial plan sees a fundamental shift in how people travel. One of the biggest challenges facing Greater Christchurch is the level of improvements required to our transport system, and that fundamental shift will be pivotal to achieving the outcomes sought for the spatial plan. It's with the focus on targeted intensification and creation of an urban form that is focused around centres and along corridors. We need to provide the public transport services that ensures that as many trips as possible are made by active travel and reducing the reliance on cars. Key to that is making it an attractive alternative. In terms of freight and logistics, Christchurch will remain as a significant and the principal freight and logistics hub for the South Island, and it's essential that development of the city continues to support that. That's by investment in infrastructure and enabling the movement of freight to the ports as well as the inland ports, which are strategically important for the sub-region. Well, now I'll go on to the key moves, and I'll hand back to Tim to discuss key move 1.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, so key move 1, and just to remind you that these these moves, again, how they fit into the strategy. These have been identified. There's 5 of them. I'm going to do the first 2, I think. But the key moves have been identified, and these moves will be fundamental in how we, I guess, realise some of the transformational shifts required to achieve the desired future state that we're reaching for in this spatial plan. So it's a key component of the overall framework. Look, the first one that I want to talk about is the prosperous development of Kāinga Nohoanga. And again, this goes back to probably the one of the key directions, which was to enable the prosperous development of Kāinga Nohoanga on Māori land and within urban areas. So this slide shows in the yellow some of those areas. The big one up to the north, the top of the frame there, is Tuhui's MR873, which is proposed to be zoned special purpose through the district plan process. So look, Kāinga Nohoanga is a form of settlement or land development for members of hapu or whānau, providing residential accommodation, essentially. It also can include accommodation for visitors and short-term residents with associated communal buildings, facilities, and a range of other things, ranging from social activities and facilities, commercial activities, cultural facilities, and other activities. So, yeah, I've been working closely with mana whenua in terms of identifying and making sure that this spatial plan didn't cut off opportunities or helped open doors for this direction, this move to be realised. So perhaps we could just move to the next one. Just going through my. So this, again, is a fundamental move that we need to make, and it's around strengthening the network of urban areas and centres. So this slide basically sets out a hierarchy, if you like, of the various urban areas we have, and it ranges from significant urban centres, major towns, locally important urban centres and towns, and key business areas. I won't read out all that slide, but it just describes the purpose and gives the location, and you can see those significant urban areas of significant employment and service functions, including major towns, Rolleston, Rangiora, and the districts. So this move is around, through my pages of notes. So we have a network of urban and town centres that provide a range of services and activities, and they vary by the populations they serve, the range of activities and services that they provide, and their various levels of accessibility by public transport. So this spatial plan is defining the role and function of these centres and helps to plan for their ongoing development as focal areas. And you remember one of the key ideas is the intensification of these key urban areas. So in some cases, they will be the focus for significant growth in the future, and they're identified there in the significant urban centres, Central City, Riccarton Corridor, Hornby, Papanui, Rolleston and Rangiora. And obviously these are going to line up with how the MRT route is rolled out, and that'll be explained a bit further down in the key moves. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Tim. So key move 3, as I've talked about, enhanced public transport is fundamental to it and needs to be looked at in an integrated way with how we plan for growth. The strengthening of our centres in Greater Christchurch will necessitate strong connections between those centres, and that will require a realistic and viable alternative to private vehicle use, as I've discussed. Mass rapid transit is that initiative which would be city shaping and fundamental to achieving that change in terms of the urban form to achieve a net zero emissions future. The route defined from Rangiora through to Rolleston provides a number of benefits, including a significant proportion of growth over the next 30 years being focused along that corridor. It will encourage greater investment in higher density development in mixed use areas and provide improved accessibility to key employment areas along that, recognising that in the city context it will provide a strengthening of connections between the city centre, Papanui, Belfast, and on to Kaiapoi, Woodend and Rangiora, and in the southwest from the city centre to Church Corner to Hornby, and providing strong connections through to Rolleston, Prebbleton and Lincoln. The business case process that Wakatahi are leading for the mass rapid transit is reaching a milestone in the near future, and more will follow on that in due course. Next key move. Key move 4 is about priority areas. So priority areas are a key tool on the urban growth agenda, and priority areas have been defined in other high growth areas as a priority for action and investment. And key to that is partnership with the Crown, but also recognising our Te Tere partnership and supporting the prosperous development of kāinga nohoanga on Māori reserves and within the urban area. The priority areas that have been defined in a city context, in the Greater Christchurch context, from north to south, Rangiora Town Centre and surrounds, Papanui, the central city, Riccarton, Hornby, and then last but not least, Rolleston Town Centre and surrounds. They're defined as priority development areas. There's also Eastern Christchurch priority area, and that's reflected on the map to the right. The priority areas have been identified from technical evaluation and where there's deemed to be significant opportunities for change in Greater Christchurch. That includes accelerated urban development in the context of the priority development areas in respect of all of them, but of most importance to the priority area in the east is environmental change to enhance resilience. And for all the priority areas, it's about providing providing opportunities for exemplar development. The kāinga nohoanga, as I touched on, is deemed to be a priority, notwithstanding the other priorities, and that again reflects the relationship, the partnership, and need for planning and enabling development of those areas. Next slide, please. This is key move 5, and is the last key move. It's about an enhanced and expanded blue-green network. Tim touched on the green belt concept, which was shown on an earlier image as a dashed green band around the outer edge of the urban areas. The blue-green network is more than that, however, it's about providing an integrated approach and a whole-of-system approach to the natural environment, the built environment, and how we interact. So integrating blue-green networks into development and taking a more regenerative approach that provides spaces and corridors that connect water bodies, parks, green areas, and the coast. The image on the right represents what would comprise a greenbelt and concept. It's to provide areas where there's a dominance of open space, but it provides for nature, rural production, and recreation. It could be any number of uses that reflects that concept, and that image seeks in an illustrative way to show what that looks like. The image on the left reflects our open spaces, our tauranga, and areas that are important to achieving a blue-green network, which includes protection of what we have, but also emphasising the enhancement of what we can do to achieve a enhanced blue-green network. Next slide. I'll hand over to Tracy.
You're on mute, Tracy.
Right. Typical. Will we ever get used to that, turning ourselves off mute? Hey, thanks, Mark. And look, we do also just want to recognise that we're going through these at these slides and these concepts quite quickly. So please do be assured there's the email address that you can ask follow-up questions to. And when you've had a chance to take your time and have a look through the plan, we're really happy to take any questions at any stage. Of course, the key part of this is it's fine to have a strategy, how are we actually going to implement it. Historically, the planning has relied a lot on the statutory tools, so district plan, land use rules to focus and shift development. We're now looking at a kind of a bigger suite of tools, and what are the other things that we can do to start influencing some of these changes. So on that slide, you can see at a really high level what some of those implementation aspects look like. And again, it's going to be in the how they then get activated and what that planning actually starts to look like. You know, the priority areas, for example, are complex and going to take local government, central government, landowners, developers to work together to actually unlock the advantages that sit within them. So still a lot of work to be done, and it is going to be a lot more around partnership as opposed to relying on statutory tools. And a key part of this, I think, a really key message that this is version 1 of the spatial plan. Things can change and things that we expect and don't expect. So there'll be monitoring of this. And it will also be reviewed, and we'll get things that will inform that will be information from Stats New Zealand, any kind of economic changes, things like that we can start reflecting in the plan. So that's, I think, really important for people to realise that this is kind of a living, breathing document that will respond to what happens in our community, but really focuses us on what are some of the actions that we can be a bit more proactive in that space. Next slide. Now this one is really difficult to read without seeing it, but it's in the back part of the spatial plan, but it really summarises the joint work program and links the opportunities. And as Tim said earlier, there's a really good double page in the plan that puts everything on one page. So right up from what are the opportunities through to what are the key moves. But this then shows the linkages between the opportunities and the action plan. So again, another good little summary to look at and to consider. Next slide. So look, we've come to the end of the slides that we've had presented, and in a minute we might have a question or two. I'll just be checking with Ben Rhodes, who's our project manager for the project and our technical lead. So we'll ask any questions in a moment, but this is just a reminder that how you make a submission. So through the greaterchristchurch.org.nz website, that is the email. So you can email us some questions, and we will certainly make sure we get back to you as soon as possible. And again, when we've come to the end of this, we will post this presentation and the Q&A all up on the website. So if you want to have a look, particularly some of those images, it's much easier if you can blow them up on the screen and actually read the keys. So hopefully, though, we've given you a bit of a high-level overview. I guess the key message and takeout before we go to questions I'd like to leave you with is that this is a progression. It is not a radical strategic change. It is, though, saying we need to do a bit more coordinated to actually achieve some of the outcomes that our community's been talking about for quite some time. And so this is now taking that extra step of saying what are some of those actions going to be that will just keep shifting the dial and achieving, continuing to live in the great place that Greater Christchurch is, that we all enjoy. So really, really genuinely interested in people's submissions. And it does in the plan outline the timeframes, but roughly we've got submissions closing towards the end of July, and then we'll be considering those and helping prepare information for an independent hearings panel. It's got an independent chair, but it has got members of your communities reflected on the panel. So they will do hearings, and you've got the opportunity to present and speak in person. So please get all the information in off the website. But I just want to check, Ben, if we've got any questions.
Got it, Tracy. We have had a couple come through, and I'll pose another one as well to Mark. Just one, Mark, I'll ask shortly, is about the eastern suburbs, not in the development section, but are their own priority area. I'll come back to that one, just give you time to absorb that. But one of the questions around opportunity 5 was, is there any specific step in this or other related strategies for employment to move into these new targeted areas? A couple of things around that. One of the key parts of the joint work program is a economic development plan that will obviously look to integrate and coordinate existing strategies and identify tools and incentives for encouraging that. And also there's the priority areas, and a lot of those are linked to those key centres, and within those there'll be individual strategies and plans and development opportunities to try and encourage those opportunities that increase employment in those areas. With Mark, with the eastern suburbs question, why are the eastern suburbs not in the development section but their own priority section? You did touch on that, but it was just missed a full explanation if you could outline that.
Yeah, certainly. So the Christchurch City Council have a leading coastal hazards adaptation planning program, which will be working with our community in terms of how we respond to the risks associated with sea level rise. That will lead to any number of outcomes in terms of how we respond. It maybe we seek to accommodate the hazard or adapt, or and one of those options is retreat. There's government direction also coming at us in terms of how we adapt and respond to climate change, and we've seen that emerging in the context of the North Island and the events up there. We do need to also plan for accommodating the population, and it's recognised that the East will still provide for housing and business, but it requires a different approach to other areas which are more focused on growth. The East, it's also about adaptation and resilience as opposed to principally growth. You're on mute, Ben.
There you go. Just making Tracy feel better. Mark, just another question to you as well. One that hasn't been posted today, but it's come up in the submissions earlier, is how the spatial plan intersects or relates with the plan change 14 and what the relationship is there.
Yeah, sure. So council notified its plan change to the district plan in March this year to enable increased intensification across the urban area. That's across residential zones, but with higher densities in and around centres. That's going through a process, and submissions will be heard late this year. In terms of the relationship, I see good alignment between them, insofar as the spatial plan is seeking to focus growth in and around centres and along corridors, which aligns. Notwithstanding the process that Plan Change 14 does need to go through, we do need to implement the government's direction in terms of intensification, and we'll continue to liaise closely across the two processes, continue to be involved across the two processes to reflect that.
Thanks, Mark. Another question. There are a lot of NIMBYs out there. How will you bring around people to understand the greater needs of the city? What's the narrative? And I guess particularly change around intensification and those sort of things can be difficult, and it is one of the bigger challenges is to see the benefits in that, change behaviours. I think one of the positive things that came out of Hui was a lot of support around the idea of intensification and the mass rapid transit. The key thing is doing that well and making it appealing, and incorporating and integrating that with open space and services, which is a focus of the preferred to inform for the spatial plan, is to concentrate around those areas. And I think within the priority areas as well, they have a strong link and relationship with central government and ideally investment, where potentially there could be exemplar developments undertaken within those to show how good intensification and change can occur. Hopefully then changing those behaviours or thoughts towards intensification. Another question, are there maps showing which areas are identified for intensification? And we will see intensification realised. I guess first and foremost, in terms of the spatial plan, it does identify along those corridors in the yellow in the spatial plan itself, those areas we're looking to sort of focus and concentrate greater intensification. They tend to follow obviously centres and those key PT routes. In terms of realising it, I mean, that's over time, this is the first step in sort of making that change and shifting to that, and looking to invest in those areas. And again, a key part of that again is those priority areas around those key locations, and investing and building partnerships with central government. Other than that, Tracy, that's the only questions we have coming through.
I noticed we've got some hands up. If you could just put if you've got a question into the Q&A, just so that we can manage that going through. I don't know if we'll just leave it a couple of seconds to see if there's any other questions come up through that format. But I'd just like to reiterate what Ben said. I think we're now entering a phase in the spatial plan where being able to show people what is possible, and councils and our partners and private community actually working together to actually use other strategies and tools that we may not have used before. And I think that's going to be the challenge, but that's where the richness of this will come out, is to say, look, we've talked about it being different, but how can we actually start showing that to the community, because it will then it builds on itself. So don't underestimate the challenge, but I think that there is, as Ben said, really good community support for the direction that this is travelling in, and then it just might need us to take a few different tools to implement it than we have previously. So very interested in people's ideas on that as we go forward as well. Just there, Ben, have we got any other questions coming through?
No, nothing's coming through.
Not at this stage?
No.
All right. I don't know if any other panel wanted to have any closing thoughts. Last chance to put any questions through live, and please don't feel pressured to do that, though. You can certainly email us afterwards and we will get to it. So I'll throw over to you, Tim.
I just want to make a quick comment on the NIMBY type of issues raised, and I think Ben answered it well in terms of the who you might as general support. But one thing I think we need to remember is that change is going to happen, whatever happens. Those population projections in terms of growth are going to happen. So I think we need to just don't pretend that we can just carry on as we are, because we're going to have to accommodate growth. And the spatial plan is looking at that growth and saying, well, how can we accommodate that and get the best outcomes? So I think that's a really important point to remember. Things are going to change. And I think the current trajectory probably isn't sustainable in terms of how we currently accommodate our growth instead of spreading out. This doesn't work because of climate change, emissions, highly productive land. So we just need to think in terms of the future. There's going to be growth. How do we accommodate that in a way that gets the best outcomes for not only our people and communities, but for our environment and mana whenua? So that's just my final comment. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tim. And unless Ben indicates we've got any other questions sitting in the Q&A, we'll be finishing a little bit earlier, and just want to really genuinely appreciate the time that you've taken to join us and hear what we've got to say today. But more importantly, we want to hear what you've got to say through that submission period. So just a reminder that the website is greaterchristchurch.org.nz. All the contact details there, the plans there in full. So plenty of opportunities to share information and contact us if you've got any questions subsequent to this presentation. So on behalf of the panel and everyone, thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate you being here. Thanks very much.